Another thing we have is the Shear tool. The Shear tool works great. I've been saving this. I had my little rain from my clouds here. I'm going to copy and paste that over here, and I'm going to show you how we can go in and make a driving rain. I'd gone through and I had my little rain coming down, but it was all coming down nice and boring, all vertical. And I want to go in and I want to make it all slanted. So it's like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to grab my direct selection tool. I'm going to grab all the points up here and I'm going to move them all over. So I know that if I hold down my Shift key and I move it left or right, it's all going to move everything in unison. And it does. But it also does this. Because the endpoints are in different locations, we get different points of movement. So it doesn't work. So that's why the Shear tool is going to come in handy. I'm going to grab my objects with the Shear tool. And the Shear tool is going to allow me to set a point of shear. So it actually is acting like a rectangle here. I'm going to click down here as my reference point, saying that's where it's going to shear. If I hold down my Shift key, it's going to pull along that axis right there and put it all together. I need to group it all together here. There we go. Don't need to group it, I just need to select it all. Click on my point of shear. It acts like a rectangle, and now when I hold down my Shift key, I can now go in and I can shear everything off so it acts as one unit. It's not moving on these points here, it's moving on my one point of reference. So I've got my objects and I click on the reference point there. Just think of this as one big rectangle when I click and pull. So if I do this with a rectangle and I want to create something like an edge of my box or something like that, I can take my Shear tool and I can click wherever I want it to anchor. And if I hold down my Shift key, I can go that way, or I can go ahead and I can pull it up or down as well and create my angled sides of my boxes. And I can create vertical ribbons like this by using the Shear tool, just by grabbing all my objects there and shearing the whole thing off into the distance. So if I take a rectangle and I decide that I want to shear it, I can take my Shear tool, click on this, Option click, and then I can go ahead and I can control the shear angle so that I can always match these measurements as I go through. Instead of just randomly doing it here, I can shear that, and there's my 15-degree shear. Now if I want to go through and say I want to create kind of this cool little maze where I've got these objects, or these kind of dividers, as I can kind of work through my maze here, these become my verticals right here. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to duplicate these objects here. And of course I can rotate them as well. Going through, rotating isn't going to do it. So I'm going to reflect them over the axis here. Shift click, reflect the axis there. Now let's rotate. Let's get the reflect. There it is. Click here, Shift click over there. I can now create my little walls here and build them like so. This becomes a darker blue. And now I can see that I can begin to create little vertical walls of a city, of a box, whatever. This is nothing more than a box that just has the thing moved over here. That's all. And then of course, put behind. But maybe I want to create some ribbons that are going to be running through everything here. And here's the tricky part when you've done a shear on an object, because the more you pull, the flatter it gets. So with a shear, when you do a shear on an object here, if I want to make this whole thing longer and I pull the whole thing, it gets flatter and flatter. I would need to go in and use my direct selection tool, but then again, I still have the same problem of trying to make sure that I get it with the same angle, which I've done pretty good. And now if I want to create a cool little divider wall or a fence or something like this, I can do this. I can build the fence and then I can shear the whole thing and do that. Build a little picket fence, simple, rectangle right there. And if I want to do something really fun, I'm going to do a little circle up at the top. Take my direct selection tool, I'm going to bump that up. I'm going to use my convert point right there. Direct selection tool, use my convert point right there, so it sucks that right in. And then I'm going to do something really fun. I'm going to take that little circle right there. Take that other little circle right there, copy it, grab all those, delete the front. There's a little top of my picket fence. Put it right there, merge it together. Ooh, that's a great little picket fence thing, isn't it? And then of course, I could duplicate that all along. Then I could grab all of these at once, take my shear tool, click here, option click, so that's going to be my point of shear, and then I can say, okay, shear at 15 degrees. Guess what I got, folks? I got myself a fence. Just like that. And of course, I can grab and I can duplicate these right on top of there. Boom, got myself a fence. You want to build stairs? Sure, because you're going to need stairs going up here, aren't you? Simple. Once you shear your object, and you know the angle of shear, which is what I used, 15 degrees, I'm going to just flip this. I can create steps very easily by going in, and I'm just going to take my direct selection tool, and I'm actually just going to move this one up here. I get this right in position. Put these at the end here. Get rid of that one fence post. Put these so they touch, so that everything comes together right where it should. Awesome. Okay. So now I want to create a set of stairs. So that's going to be in the front. That's going to be my little kick plate. I'm going to duplicate this. And now what I need to do is I need to create the other set of stairs. So then you think, okay, these need to go this way. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and reflect over top like this. And I can reflect over the top like this, trying to get those things rotated. What I want is I want to shear this whole thing so that these now match this edge right here. So if I take my shear tool, do this. If I go in and I simply pull, do you see how I can go in and I can start whacking the thing out all over the place? If I hold down my shift key when I do this and I click on a point and I begin to shear, that's going to allow me to shear over those particular angles. And it makes it really tricky to do, doesn't it? Because it just doesn't want to work. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my object right here and I'm going to put it right up against here. And I'm going to put it right up against here. And this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to grab my little handle right down here. I'm just going to bring it to match the edge right there, just like so. And now I've got my little stair step right there. Make this a different color, so we make it a little highlight there, so we got our highlight. And then I can duplicate this, and this goes right over there, and then my stair goes right over here, and then this goes down here, and I'm at the base of my object. Obviously I need to line them up a little bit better, but now I got my stair step going up to my little edges right there. If I want to add a little bit of dimension to my little picket fence here, this is what I'm going to do. This is, I go in and I use my option key and I duplicate. So if I just go in and I hold down my option key and I duplicate like this, it's going to create a whole set of items right there. And of course make the darker one on the surface there. So it gives me kind of the dimensional look to them. So it makes it look like I have a dimensional fence right there just by changing the shadow on one side. Part of the problem with duplicating it like that, you can see all these little points right here. I could merge those all together really like that, and then I could get rid of all those little points if I wanted to. Go into my outline mode and get rid of those points, join that all together like so. That's a little bit more complicated. But then I could just park that right on top there, and now I have my nice little dimensional fence right there without having to go into 3D mode. And we are going to go into 3D mode because we have to. We just have to do that. So there's my little stair step with my fence going up there, creating a nice little, infographic poster kind of thing, leading up to a house. Oh, wait a second, what house? There, this house right here. Perfect. Have a little house. And of course, the angle isn't correct. Not a problem. I can just go in here, select the middle point right here, and I could just go in and I could then shift that to make sure that all those match my given angles, increase the size, drop that right in there. Make it nice and big. That went up just a little bit too far. Look at that. Make it really big. Park it right behind there. We haven't drawn anything yet, right? We haven't used the pen tool to draw anything, no shapes whatsoever, just the basic shapes. Just the basic shapes. Everything. So far, just the basic shapes. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on the page here, but it's all just basic shapes. Okay, one more thing that we want to show you here, and I want to make sure that we get through all of this stuff, because where did I go in and do that. Okay, one more thing I want to show you. So now we got the rotate tool. Rotate and duplicate around objects here to create the gear, the sun, the flowers, things like that. We got the reflect tool, so we can create our shield. We have our shear tool, so we can go ahead and do our rain, but also put things into perspective, as we did before. We did them in a very simple way using the box. So there's a rotate, shear, scale, that kind of thing right there. All those tools. Scale tool I don't use very often, simply because I can go in and I can scale everything very easily without having to scale multiple things. But using the scale tool, it does have one unique feature. And the one unique feature that it has is, if you've ever tried to draw a whole set of concentric circles and make them stay the same distance apart, you'll need the scale tool. So I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to put a stroke around that circle. And let's pick a totally different color. I think we need green. Okay. And I would like to go in and I would like to create equally larger concentric circles going bigger and bigger and bigger all the way out. So don't ask me how this works. I'll show you how it works, but the concept behind it understands math and a parabolic curve. Okay? And I'm sure I lost you at the word math. So I would like to create concentric rings. So I take my scale tool, and again, I'm going to option click in the center because that determines where it's going to scale from. And then I'd like to go ahead and I'd like to increase it and basically make it like twice the size every single time. So I don't want it to scale the stroke and effects in this place, in this case, because then the circles or the stroke is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger as we go. So I'd like to go in and I'd like to make this 150% bigger. And actually I'm going to make it 200% bigger. So 200%, and I'm going to copy it as we go. It's like, awesome. Okay? So there's my second circle. And I would like to go ahead and repeat that. So you would assume that now with a second circle selected, I would option click in here and I would say, make this 200%, right? And I'd click copy. It then starts getting larger and larger and larger away. So here's what I was telling you about this whole parabolic curve. Remember when you used to graph the XY chart and the chart used to start off slow and then you'd have to really steep spike? Because the first one I did 200%, I need to do the next one 150%. Okay? And then I need to do the next one, I think it's 133% in order to do that. And then as I go down, it needs to be 125% and copy. And these are going to give me perfectly placed concentric circles. Okay? Don't ask me how the math works. It just works. Okay? So now with the scale tool, I have been able to go in and do concentrically placed circles. I could have just actually gone in and used my nice little grid tool right here, but I didn't know about that. But I was able to go in and do nicely concentric circles all around my object. And using the scale tool, keeping everything in the same location. And then I could then go in and I could manipulate those shapes if I wanted to, take out sections of those. And this is one of the ways that I can create those concentric circle graphs that you may have seen. And if I increase the size here, I can do all of these graphs. And I could then go in and have certain ones start in certain locations. I could go in and I could take that and I could take that out of there. And I could go in and add certain points along my lines here with my pen tool on each and every one of these. And I could do kind of more of a concentric circle graph where things start at the same place, but stop in different places. So I could take this out and use my pen tool to put a point right there. And now I can create these really cool graphs that have, let me put that pen tool point right there. There we go. And we get this one, that's going to come out, that's going to come out too, and the pen tool is going to put a point right there, and there it is, and I don't want this in the middle. So if you've ever seen those graphs that all start at the same place and then continue around to show different values, this is one of the ways you can do it. But you want to have equal consistent spacing around there, and if you do it using the donut effect with one knocking out the other one, trying to chop those sections up into circles doesn't work. But now, and if you do a search for infographic, there's a lot of these. Now you've got this really cool shape with concentric circles. You divide it all up, and now I can put my values in there. I can draw little infographics there, you know, put little icons in here, draw little connector lines coming off here, coming off here, coming off there, coming off there. and I now have a really cool chart or a graphic showing certain amounts of steps. Now, because these are circles, I can easily divide them up in, it's 360 degrees, so I can figure, you know, what 80% is, or 20% is, or 30%. It does require math, but now I've got a really cool concentric circle. Or I just have a broken electric stove. Either one. That can work as well. So that's another way to do it. But the scale tool allows me to scale and do things concentrically, larger or smaller, in there by going in and doing the scale tool, and of course option clicking with the scale tool to go larger and smaller. So I like it a lot. Have any questions out there?
You know, not so many questions, but someone would like to know if there's time. Snoodily would love to see how you sheared the rain.
Oh, sure. Shearing the rain. So I'm going to copy the rain that I had over here. I'm going to copy that, and we're going to paste it right in the middle of my screen, or right there. So I've got the rain, and if I wanted to go in and I wanted to shear the rain, I know that if I use my direct selection tool, and I just grab the tops and I pulled, my anchor points are completely off. And I can't do that on the bottom either, because if I can do that on the bottom, everything works, but still I've got the same problem. So I select everything, and I take the shear tool, and with the shear tool, I always select the wrong place. Think of this as being an entire rectangle. Even though I've got multiple lines, with a shear tool, it looks at it as one object. I'm going to then go ahead, click someplace where I want the corner to be anchored, and then I hold down my Shift key and I shear along that point that I'm pulling from, right? Just like that. And then it goes ahead and it shears the whole thing rather than shearing from one specific point on each line. It shears from a fixed point as if it's a whole shape. Pretty sweet. Yep. Okay. So we've got the shear, the scaling, the reflect, and scale, rotate, shear, and reflect tools, a reference point, and then going through and doing the step right here where we can go in and scale everything. We also have to be concerned with distribution of items as well, going in and distributing items over an area. So if I wanted to go in and I wanted to put a whole bunch of circles in a line here, I could take and I could draw a circle like that, and just grab that circle. And I want to go in and I want to take and I want to distribute my circles over a distance. So I go in and I duplicate all my circles as such by hitting Command D, and I got all my circles. And then I realize that I really need to have my circles this far apart, and I want everything to be equally distributed in between. So I had just guessed with a distance here, but now I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to go under the window menu under Align, and my Align feature allows me to line everything top, bottom, left, and right, everything. And I can also distribute my items as well. The way that distribute items work is you put your first item in its location, the last item in its location, and all the other ones, it doesn't matter where. Then I'm going to distribute the items here vertically between their centers, and when I do that, the first item and the last item are my guide, everything else goes right in. So if I take this one and I put it way down here and I select all my objects, then I go in and I click that, and it distributes everything evenly. So I had kind of used that effect when I had put the little shadows right in here, and this I just kind of guessed, and it happened to work out really well. But if those circles were off, I would draw my circle, put it wherever I want it to be, and if they need to be closer together, I distribute everything, and they now come together like that. But that only works if you have the same size object. So if I wanted to go in and I wanted to do a circle, and I wanted to now create my circle so that it gets smaller as it goes down or it goes up to create this appearance of, you know, things coming out, I could then take my circle, and if I did my scale tool, I could then go in and say, okay, you know, I'm going to put it so it scales over here. I'm going to option click, and I'm going to say, okay, 75%, and I'm going to copy this. And as I do that, you can see that it's copied it, it's now 75%, and if I keep doing duplicate, it's going to go ahead and keep doing it at 75% of that size. Well, all these circles are piled on top of each other, so I'm going to grab the one circle and I'm going to say, okay, I want that down there. Select all the circles, and I distribute everything via their centers. When I distribute everything via their centers, you can see that these overlap, and it's like, no, 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 I want the same amount of space between the objects, not the same amount of space between the centers. And it is an optical illusion because the same amount of space between here and here is the same amount of space between here and here. So this worked exactly opposite of what I wanted it to work. I wanted to put spacing between the objects, and this is distribute them between the center of the objects. That's where if I click on the little cheese grater, little drop-down menu on the Align panel, I want to show the options here, and that's when the distribute spacing comes in. So the distribute spacing basically says, distribute the space evenly between these objects. So if I put my objects here, and I align everything here, they will all be centered, but I'm going to have non-conforming spacing between them. I want the same space. So if I put my objects first and last here, and I say, okay, distribute them like this, it will then distribute all the spacing evenly based on where my first and my last object is. I'm going to undo that, okay? And you notice how it's like, why can't I go and fill this in and say I want 1/4 of an inch between these objects here? It says something about to specify this, choose that, and click on that, and whatever. And, you know, obviously, I don't understand. So what this says here is when you have all these objects, what you want to do is you want to go in and you want to select a key object. And a key object is the object that you want to measure from. So it doesn't matter what object it is, I'm just going to randomly choose this one. And what I'm going to do is I click once, so I select everything and I click once on this object. Let me get out of isolation mode. I click once on this object, and do you see how that object now has a dark blue border around it? That is telling me that this is the key object. The key object could be the object that I go ahead and align from, distribute from, or in this case, now that's the one that's going to use the specific spacing. So if I say I want 1/2 an inch between all these spacing between this one, using that as the key object, it will then now give me 1/2 an inch of spacing. It does not take into account the size, it just literally gives me 1/2 an inch of space between my objects. So that is distribute spacing, where I'm actually getting the space between the objects. Aligning the spacing so that we have the space between the centers there, we'll go ahead and create that kind of staggered look where it's going to be closer together because of the objects. Now, either one could be beneficial. If you wanted to do something like this and you wanted to create this cool effect, you know, where you're doing some type of sprinkler system, or you wanted to show things going off into the distance and you wanted to show equal spacing, that's great. But if I wanted to do this and I wanted to show progression over time, this is more of what I'd want to have done. And it gives a very different effect, especially if you want to create a gradient feel without literally providing a gradient. This can be done really easily if I were to take something like this. I need to do a little bit more pasteboard here, artboard. This would be great if I wanted to create some type of gradient effect on an object where I'm going to make those orange. I've got something in the background here that's also orange. I'm going to make this a little bit darker as well. And I can create this cool gradient effect with this whole set of objects. Group those together. I can put those here, and of course then I can duplicate as well. And I can create a gradient effect on an object to give that appearance that something is going off into the distance. And if I really wanted to exaggerate that, then I could go in and I could go ahead and flare those edges a bit. And now I have a cheese grater, or I have a piece of cheese, something like that. So that could be a cool way to create a gradient as well. Again, I'm not going to use a gradient. I'm not going to use a soft drop shadow. I'm going to do it as an actual icon so that I can keep that same look and feel with everything that I do. So, kind of cool. If I wanted to use these objects to rotate around something as well, I could. I could copy these and draw a circle and paste those, rotate those into position, scale them however I want to, put them right there. Of course, use my rotate tool, option click, do one every 15 degrees, and duplicate it all around. And why is everything not doing that? Group it, rotate it, duplicate it, copy, There we go. Look at that. You've seen those before, haven't you? Sure, that's how you do it. And that's an even more compelling sun than the one that I first created. All depends on the style of what it is that you're doing. And that's pretty awesome right there. And it's all going through and distributed it, or aligning everything, and then just creating that stair-step effect, so you've got that really cool thing. And you can see how this stuff builds. The duplication of these items, you create one thing, turns into other things, build things. Yeah. Now, don't get too carried away because we've got a lot of different styles on the page here. And thank goodness this whole thing doesn't have to be combined into one infographic. Because if it did, we'd have a mess. But nonetheless, I'm going to move stuff over again, and we're going to show you something even more awesome. Because what we showed you is not awesome enough.
Again, once again, Jason, fascinated watching you work. Like, so many great comments. They didn't know they could do this with shapes. They didn't know this could be so easy. So we've been getting that all afternoon.
Awesome. Wonderful. And the amazing part is that we've spent a lot of time, and it doesn't seem like we've drawn a lot of shapes right here, but we have a really good, collection of just a whole bunch of cool shapes and everything that's just truly amazing. Yeah. So I want to show you a little bit more dimensional stuff here using this stuff, and we had kind of our ribbon here that we did. I want to show you another type of infographic that is kind of cool and trendy. And basically, people take rectangles here, and I'm just going to duplicate these rectangles like so. Duplicate, duplicate, there we go. And I'm just going to lighten these things up a bit. And this type of infographic allows you to go in and kind of create bands of color or shapes and actually build these out so that they kind of create like an expanding graphic style that's kind of like ribbons going off into space. So I'm going to take my objects right here, and I'm going to duplicate them. And what I want to do is I want to go and I want to create some type of angle on this. So what I'm going to do here is I want to create kind of this ribbon that grows substantially as it gets closer to you. So I'm going to grab these ends, and I'm going to shift click up once and shift click there. I'm going to shift click down here, and I'm going to shift click down again. That kind of creates this cool effect where I can create this kind of path or this road, but kind of make a vertical wall where it gets a little bit bigger. I'm actually going to do that one more here, and then one more here. And shift click down there, shift click down there. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of black to each one of these. No, a little bit of black to each one of these, not a whole black to one of these. Why is that? I just want 10% more. Oh, there it is. Okay, there it is. You can kind of get a gist of what we're doing here to get this perspective going on. And I'm sure you've seen infographics like this, where you do that. And then I can kind of create this stair-step effect as things start to get bigger and come towards you. I'm going to copy these. I'm going to use my shear or my reflect here. I'm going to reflect over the axis right there. And I can put those, snap those right in there, and I can kind of create this in and out kind of effect. Or I can make these things even bigger, where we go in and we just keep increasing the size of these things as well. Or we can just reduce all that stuff down back to normal so that everything flattens out and continues along that path as well. Use my eyedropper tool. There it is. And there we have this cool stair-step effect of things kind of dimensionally coming out towards you. In bars, they grow in size as they come towards you. And again, like I showed you, just going in and using your shift up arrow and down arrow to kind of create that instead of trying to remember all the angles. That's one of my favorites, among many of my favorites. And want to get into a little bit more funky stuff where trying to wrap things around like cylinders. So we can go and we can do this perspective part, but I want to do a really awesome cylinder, and this is where people are going to just like fall off their chair. So what I'd like to do is, remember this little cylinder that we created right here? Where's my little cigarettes that we had? Oh yeah, here we go. My little cigarettes, my little cylinders. I'm going to grab one of these, I'm going to copy this, paste it over here, right there. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to do this cool little drape over a tube here, because I want to show how this, just a real simple icon of how paper goes through kind of like rollers here. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I just want to show the paper roller effect, and I'm just going to do 2 for now. And I want to create the papers coming over and above the roller. So over here we had worked on, where was it? Right here. We had worked on this cool little rounded paper thing that kind of fits over on this edge right here. And we had created these edges. Remember that little edge that we had done right there, that we had added to the left side and subtracted from the right side here? I'm just going to grab this little paper, and I'm going to put it over here, and I'm going to drop it on the tube. I don't even need the other side there. I'm going to grab this, I'm going to duplicate this, and of course I'm going to reflect over the surface. This is going to be the light side, so this is going to be a much lighter color right there. And I just line that up so that I get kind of that perfect roller going over there. Now, I can take my object and I can insert this over the tube. This goes in front, this goes behind. We move it all over. And of course, change the color of the roller here so we can see it. And now we have our little object going over the roller. And of course, we could make this roller bigger to make it fit right there. And maybe that's great, it's not going over the whole thing vertically. Maybe it's going to go at a slight angle. So I'm going to grab this little paper here, and I can kind of grab that off to the side, grab that off to the side so that it rolls like that. And I can kind of give that little effect, kind of a little tent effect of this right here. You see, however, when we do our edges right there, how we get that kind of effect, and this is where we'd have to go in with our handles here and kind of pull that over so that handle is going to be in line with our object or with our plane so that we get that so it rolls right over. But check that out. Yeah, I'm going to make the roller bigger here so that we can actually make it look like it's conforming to the paper. And tuck that right up inside as well. And now we've got that really cool roller going over our object. And if I want to do the same thing with this roller, I'm just going to duplicate this roller right here. Like so, group it together. I take this, copy and paste it, and I'm going to simply rotate it upside down. Come on. Wow. Come on. Rotate. There we go. Rotate it upside down as well. Of course, this is backwards, so I need to reflect it over the surface like that. Voila. And so this can come over. Oh no, I had that right, didn't I? Because that paper's got to come down and that one's got to go behind. So this is where the whole dimension thing, it helps if you know what you're doing. I'm just learning as I go. So we've got this, and now what I want to do is I want to make my paper come out the front of this. So I'm going to see this, and of course this paper is going right here. So I'd actually have to end up switching these corners here with this so that I could have my paper come up over the edge. So this is going to come up here, yep, like so. That goes in there, and then this comes here. That goes in front of the whole object, and there's my paper roll. Bring to front, send to back. That's basically it. Yeah. Show a little newspaper roll coming off there. Some simple little line right there. We can do that. And make it look like something's printed on the page right there. Bring it right on down. Of course, duplicate it.
Jason, could you show how you make your workspace bigger, please?
Sure.
Your artboard?
Yep. So artboard tool is right above the hand tool in the toolbar. And when you click on that, it activates your entire artboard. And I just keep making it bigger. Like that song, make the logo bigger. And then when I'm done, just go back to my selection tool, and it reverts right to there. Yes, indeed. Now we got little paper rollers. Oh, and by the way, you can do a great slalom course like this if you ever want to, because then you could just take everything here, duplicate it, and then rotate it so that it sits straight up. And now you can go ahead and do a nice little slalom course right there. So for those of you that want to know how you do ribbons, this is one of the ways you can do ribbons. Yes, it takes a lot of time, but you can do it. And it all started right here with just using the basic edge. We had a rectangle, and then we had created the circle and the square and left the little square, put the square there, merged it together, took that little circle square, took it apart, flipped it, changed the shadow, and now we've got this, the slalom, and we're slalom where somebody knocked it over. Or wrappers going through, whatever, printing press, you name it, just like that. If you try to draw this manually with a pen tool, you're going to mess it up. Because you can't think this way. Well, you can think this way, it's just most people don't. That's another one of the tricky parts. So one of the things we haven't showed you is the width shape tool. So we've gone through all of our fills and strokes and things like that, but I want to show you something even more cool. I've got a circle, and I was able to go in and do all these concentric circles here and do these graphs, you know, to stop at certain points, which we're going to revisit tomorrow. But what I'd like to do here is I want to go in and I want to create a shape here that tapers the stroke. So what I've got here is I want to taper the stroke here so that I'm going to have a thin stroke here and a thick stroke at the end. And if you have ever tried to do this and try to do it normally, trying to draw this so that these points come together and then it grows widthwise all the way to the end here, it isn't easy. I've never been able to do it. So what I'm going to do here is I've got my stroke, my path right here, and I'm going to take one of these objects, or take this, I think I'm going to round the ends of this right here, make it look cool. There's the ends. And now what I'd like to do is I want to make this really thin and this really thick. So it's going to taper, so I can do kind of like a temperature or a duration type of notation. There's no real easy way to go in here and just pinch the end here, and even if I do a fill, but we do have the awesome thing, which is the width shape tool. The width shape tool looks like this little bird sitting in the toolbar here. And what the width shape tool allows me to do is click on a point of the shape, and it allows me to reduce or enlarge that point over all the entire line. And now I've got this really awesome shape that is a path that I now have the taper of, and if I increase the size overall of this thing, it keeps that taper right in there. So I can create this really cool kind of, not a concentric circle, but a circle that's going to be diminishing. Now, if I use my spiral tool and I do something like that, and I put some more spirals in, and I apply a stroke to that, one of the cool things I can do with that with the width shape tool is go in, and if I do that, I can now create concentric circles, not really, but I can do swirls that now fade from large to small. Not really in the realm of infographics here, kind of more, a little bit more illustrative, but nonetheless, kind of cool. Now, if I then wanted to do something else with this, I could go back in here, and at any point, taking my width shape tool here, I could actually pinch and narrow things as I go, so I could create really cool effects overall on this. Again, a little bit crazy, a little outside the realm of what it is that we're doing. But the width shape tool can be a huge asset when you want to go ahead and you want to have something taper like this. Once you've done this, it's still a stroke, so I can turn on and turn off my end caps there, and I can create some really cool effects like this. So I can have things that are coming off from the distance, coming into the foreground here, and then happening. And then if I wanted to turn this into a shape, I could simply just go in and outline the stroke. And there I've got this cool shape that I could have things going through or coming out. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw a box right there. Then of course I could go in with my shear tool, and I could pull that whole thing over. I could do that, and I could change the color of that. So I can give some cool dimension to what it is that I'm doing here and kind of give this feeling where I've got these items coming in, spiraling around, and coming out the other side. And of course, I could do something like this. It drops down. And then continues on like so. Little ramp, corkscrew, whatever you want to call it, right there, and create kind of a cool graphic that way. So now the clincher, I'm going to wrap up the day.
Great.
With this one.
Perfect.
Is, so we've talked about all these different shapes here. I want to talk about some indicators. And we kind of did a few little indicators on the little, let's see, where's my little test tube right there? I did my little indicators there. I want to show you how you do indicators on something that's going to be round. Because you want them to, of course, drape over the whole thing. And again, it's really complicated. No, it isn't. So I'm going to take a circle. And I want to have little indicators because this is, you know, going over a tube. And I'm going to take my circle and I'm going to actually get rid of the shapes like so. And I'm going to just have this as a quarter circle right here. I'm going to duplicate this as another quarter circle, and I'm just going to join the top and join the bottom together to create a curved edge. That's all. And I wouldn't go in and I wouldn't do two circles on top of each other like this and then get rid of them, because the problem if I do that and I do that, I get the curve that comes over the top here on down. That's why I went in and I just did and duplicated it and then just connected it so I get a flat top and a flat bottom. Then I can take my object and I can put it on here and I can scale that so it comes halfway around there, and I now have my object matching the curve of my object. Of course, I had compressed this line to give it a little bit more dimension, so if I bring this to the end here and I see that it doesn't fit, then I could go in and I could just simply roll it there so it fits, and now I could actually create these little like measurement marks along there to create little tabs, something like that. Okay, what happens if you're doing a nice little tape machine and you want to have this little roll of tape coming out there? Well, this is how you do it. You can create your little dimensional circle and that becomes your little tape. And you could take your dimensional circle like so, make it the oval, go in and create your little tape like this, put that behind. There it is, and then your tape can come out like so. We can fill it up, bring that comes to the front. Tape becomes much lighter, like so. There's your little tape, there's your little ribbon spool, and of course if you want to make it look like it's an actual spool coming out of here, let me just darken that a bit. Let's make it really dark, a really dark tape. I could just take one of my spool ends here, copy it, reduce it down in size, and I can put that in there. Grab my little tape right there. Works there. And then gotta do my little dimension thing. Option, click and duplicate, drag it all together, put it together, and then I can have my tape peeling off it. Of course, make that a little bit lighter so we can see the tape peeling off it. There it is. Plug that in there. Ooh, there's my little tape peeling off my thing right there. Cover up those edges. Wow. There it is.